The flames licked higher into the darkening Nebraska sky, turning the modest homestead into a funeral pyre as Nora Simmons frantically pulled at the door that wouldn't budge. Her hands, raw and blistering, beat against the wood that her husband Thomas had barricaded from the outside, before mounting his horse and disappearing into the distance with nothing but a cold glance back at the home they'd built together. The smoke filled her lungs, choking her cries for help as she stumbled toward the small window at the back of the cabin. Nebraska Territory, 1859, was an unforgiving place for anyone, but especially for a woman left to die by the man who had vowed to protect her. The heat pressed against her skin like an iron as she clawed at the window frame, her vision blurring from the thick black smoke that consumed every breath. Outside, Travis Blackwell pulled his horse to a sudden halt, the animal rearing at the sight of the blazing homestead on the horizon. He'd been tracking a stray from his small herd when the smell of burning timber caught his attention. Without hesitation, he dug his heels into his horse's flanks, racing toward the inferno that lit up the evening prairie. As he approached, Travis caught sight of movement in one of the window's hands, frantically pushing against the glass. Someone was trapped inside. He leapt from his still-moving horse, bandana pulled up over his nose and mouth as he ran toward the burning structure. "Hold on!" he shouted, though he doubted anyone could hear him over the roar of the flames. The front door was jammed, but a quick assessment told him it wasn't the fire that made it immovable. Someone had driven a thick piece of wood through the handles. Travis's blood ran cold at the realization as he yanked his knife from his belt and pried at the makeshift lock. Inside, Nora had collapsed to her knees, the smoke stealing the last of her strength. Her thoughts drifted to the 3 years she'd spent in this cabin, to the child she'd lost last winter, to the way her husband had changed after that growing distant, then cruel, and finally murderous. The irony didn't escape her that the home Thomas had promised would be their haven would become her tomb. The sound of splintering wood barely registered through her fading consciousness. Then suddenly, strong arms were around her, lifting her from the floor. She felt herself being carried, the heat intensifying before a rush of cool evening air hit her face. Her rescuer stumbled several yards from the cabin before gently laying her on the soft prairie grass. "Madam? Madam, can you hear me?" The voice seemed to come from far away as Nora fought to open her eyes. When she finally managed to focus, she saw a man kneeling beside her, tall, broad-shouldered, with concern etched across features that were handsome despite being smudged with soot. His brown cowboy hat was pushed back, revealing dark hair that fell across his forehead. "Thomas," she whispered, the only word she could manage before darkness claimed her. Travis frowned at the name, wondering if it belonged to whoever had trapped this woman inside the burning house. He checked her pulse steady, if weak, before looking back at the homestead. Now fully engulfed in flames. There would be nothing left by morning but ashes and charred timber. He gathered the unconscious woman in his arms again and carried her to his horse. His own place was a few miles away, a modest ranch he'd been building over the last 2 years. He'd have to get her there, tend to her burns, and figure out what sort of trouble she was in. One thing was certain. Someone had wanted this woman dead, and Travis Blackwell had just made himself part of her story. Nora drifted in and out of consciousness as the horse carried them across the prairie. The gentle rocking motion and the strong arms holding her upright in the saddle provided an odd comfort. When she finally came fully awake, she was lying on a bed in an unfamiliar room. The scent of pine and leather replacing the acrid smell of smoke that still lingered in her memory. "You're awake." The deep voice came from a chair near the window. The man who had pulled her from the fire sat watching her, relief evident in his expression. Nora tried to sit up but winced as pain shot through her hands. Looking down, she saw they were wrapped in clean bandages. "Easy now," he cautioned, moving to pour water from a pitcher by the bed. "You've got some burns, nothing too serious, but they'll need time to heal." "Where am I?" Her voice was rough, her throat raw from the smoke. "My ranch, about 5 miles east of your place." He offered her the cup, helping her hold it when her bandaged hands proved too painful to use. "I'm Travis Blackwell. Most folks just call me Travis." After she drank, Nora sank back against the pillows, studying her rescuer in the lamplight. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with kind eyes that contrasted with the weathered look of a man who spent his days under the harsh prairie sun. "Thank you for saving me, Mr. Blackwell." "Travis," he corrected gently. "And you're welcome, though I'd appreciate knowing who it is I pulled from that fire." Nora Simmons. She paused, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger, but something in his steady gaze told her she could trust him. "My husband tried to kill me." Travis's expression darkened. "I figured as much when I saw that door barred from the outside." "Thomas," her voice broke on the name. "We'd been having troubles. He blamed me for—" She stopped, unwilling to speak of their lost child. "He changed. Said I was useless to him now." "No man has the right to do what he did," Travis said, his voice low and steady. "Do you have family nearby?" Nora shook her head. "My parents are back east in Pennsylvania. I haven't seen them since Thomas and I came west 3 years ago." She looked around the room, noticing for the first time the simple but clean furnishings. "Is there a Mrs. Blackwell who might object to my being here?" A shadow passed over Travis's face. "No, madam. No, Mrs. Blackwell." He stood, adjusting the blanket over her. "You should rest. We can figure things out in the morning." As he turned to leave, Nora caught his sleeve with her fingertips. "He might come back. Thomas, I mean. When he realizes I'm not dead." Travis's jaw tightened. "Let him try. This is my land. And you're under my protection now." The simple declaration brought tears to Nora's eyes. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone speak of protecting her rather than hurting her. "Thank you," she whispered. Travis nodded once, then left the room, closing the door softly behind him. In the main room of his modest ranch house, Travis stoked the fire and poured himself a small measure of whiskey. The woman sleeping in his spare room had stirred something in him. He thought long buried a protective instinct, certainly, but something more as well. He'd recognized the fear in her eyes, having seen it in his mother's gaze too many times as a boy. His father had been cut from the same cloth as this Thomas Simmons, it seemed. Men who believed they owned their wives the same way they owned their horses or cattle. Travis had vowed long ago never to become that kind of man, and perhaps that was why he'd remained alone, despite the occasional matchmaking attempts from the ladies in Nebraska City. He sipped his whiskey, staring into the flames and thinking of the blazing homestead. Tomorrow he'd ride into town, let Sheriff Daniels know what had happened. Thomas Simmons wouldn't be the first man to flee after attempting murder, but the law had ways of finding such men, especially in a territory where strangers were noticed and remembered. Morning came with the soft golden light that Travis had always loved about his piece of Nebraska. He'd been up for hours, tending to his small herd and preparing breakfast before checking on his guest. He found Nora sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the rolling prairie beyond. "Morning," he said, staying by the doorway. "Thought you might be hungry." Nora turned, a small smile touching her lips despite the pain evident in her eyes. "I am, actually, and I'd like to wash up if possible." "Already ahead of you." Travis gestured to a basin of water and clean towels he'd placed on the dresser. "There's a dress there, too. Belonged to my sister when she visited last summer. Might be a bit big on you, but it's clean." "You have a sister?" Nora asked, seeming grateful for conversation that didn't revolve around her ordeal. "Two, both married and living in Kansas now." Travis smiled. "They worry about their bachelor brother out here all alone." "They needn't worry. You seem quite capable." Nora's gaze traveled around the neat room. "Your home is lovely. It's modest, but it's mine." Travis shifted, suddenly aware of the intimacy of standing in a bedroom with a woman he barely knew. "I'll leave you to it. Breakfast is ready whenever you are." As he turned to go, Nora called after him. "Travis, did you mean what you said last night, about protecting me?" He looked back at her, seeing the vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. "Yes, madam, I did. And I'm a man of my word." The relief in her eyes was palpable. "Thank you." After washing and changing into the borrowed dress, which was indeed too large but a vast improvement over her smoke-damaged clothing, Nora made her way to the kitchen. The smell of coffee and bacon reminded her how long it had been since she'd eaten. Thomas had locked her in the cabin without food the day before, part of his escalating cruelty in the weeks leading up to his final act. Travis stood at the stove, his broad back to her as he flipped hotcakes in a cast-iron skillet. For a moment, Nora simply watched him, struck by the domestic scene. Thomas had never cooked, considering it women's work beneath his dignity. "Something smells wonderful," she said, announcing her presence. Travis turned, his expression warming as he took in the sight of her in the blue cotton dress. "Hope you like hotcakes. It's about the only thing I can make that doesn't taste like leather." "I'm sure they're delicious." She moved to help, but he waved her to a chair. "Your hands need healing. Sit, please." Nora obeyed, secretly relieved as the pain in her burned hands was still considerable. She watched as Travis served up a plate for her, then filled a cup with coffee. "I can manage," she said when he began to cut her hotcakes into bite-sized pieces. "Really?" He hesitated, then nodded, taking the seat across from her. "Sorry, don't get many guests out here. Forgotten how to behave in polite company." "There's nothing impolite about kindness," Nora said softly. She awkwardly picked up her fork, determined to feed herself despite the pain. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Travis spoke again. "I need to ride into Nebraska City today. Sheriff should know what happened." Nora's fork clattered against her plate. "No, please, She stopped, composing herself. "Thomas has friends in town. The sheriff's one of them." Travis frowned. "Sheriff Daniels? He's a good man, Nora." "Maybe to other men," she said quietly. "But when Thomas—" She couldn't bring herself to speak of the times her husband had hurt her, how the sheriff had looked the other way. "Please, just give me a few days to figure out what to do next." Travis studied her, seeing the fear return to her eyes. "All right," he agreed finally, "but I still need to go to town for supplies. Will you be all right here alone for a few hours?" The question took her by surprise. Thomas had never asked if she would be all right, never considered her feelings on any matter. "Yes," she said, touched by his concern. "I'll be fine. I'll show you where I keep my rifle before I go, just in case." He saw her startled expression and added quickly, "Not that you'll need it. This is peaceful country, but a woman alone should be able to protect herself." After breakfast, Travis gave her a brief tour of the ranch house, a simple structure with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, his bedroom, the guest room where she had slept, and a small study lined with books that surprised her with their variety. "You read Emerson?" she asked, running her fingertips over the spine of a volume of essays. "When the work's done and the nights are long," Travis replied with a slight smile. "Surprises you, does it? That a cowboy might like philosophy?" "No," Nora said honestly. "What surprises me is finding anyone out here who shares my interests. Thomas called my books a waste of space." She bit her lip, wondering if her small collection had survived the fire, or if they, like everything else she'd owned, were now ashes. "You're welcome to borrow anything you like," Travis offered, seeming to read her thoughts. "Might help pass the time while you heal." Before leaving for town, Travis showed her where he kept his Winchester rifle and how to use it, a lesson Thomas had never bothered with, preferring to keep her dependent on him for protection. Then he was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading as he rode toward Nebraska City. Alone in the quiet house, Nora felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. Fear of what the future held for a woman with no home, no possessions, and a husband who wanted her dead. Relief that, for the moment at least, she was safe from Thomas's unpredictable rages. She made her way back to the bookshelf, selecting a volume of poetry before settling in a chair by the window. The vast Nebraska landscape stretched before her, so different from the crowded streets of Philadelphia where she'd grown up, yet, in this moment, more welcoming than any place she'd been in years. Travis's thoughts were troubled as he rode toward town. Nora Simmons was clearly terrified of her husband, and her reluctance to involve Sheriff Daniels disturbed him. He'd always believed Daniels to be fair-minded, but he knew too well how men could close ranks, how the law sometimes turned a blind eye to what went on between a man and his wife. Nebraska City was bustling when he arrived, the streets filled with wagons and horses as settlers and traders went about their business. The territory was growing rapidly, the promise of land drawing people west despite the hardships that awaited them. He tied his horse outside the general store, nodding to familiar faces as he entered. Mrs. Peterson, the proprietor's wife, greeted him warmly. "Travis Blackwell, haven't seen you in nearly a month. Beginning to think you'd gone feral out there on that ranch of yours." He smiled, removing his hat. "Just busy with the herd, Mrs. Peterson. Need to stock up today, though." As he gathered supplies, he listened to the conversations around him, alert for any mention of Thomas Simmons or a fire. But there was nothing, which meant the news hadn't reached town yet. As Mrs. Peterson tallied his purchases, he casually asked, "Seen Thomas Simmons lately? Thought I might run into him today." The woman's expression soured slightly. "That man came through yesterday, loading up his wagon like he was heading out on a long journey. Didn't even ask after his wife." "Which ain't like most husbands." Travis's hand tightened on the counter. "He say where he was headed?" "Mentioned something about meeting his brother in Colorado Territory. Seemed in an awful hurry." She narrowed her eyes. "Why are you asking after Simmons? Thought you two weren't exactly friendly." "Just curious," Travis said, forcing a casual tone. "Thanks for the supplies, Mrs. Peterson." Outside, he secured his purchases to his horse before heading toward the sheriff's office. Despite Nora's fears, he couldn't let a man get away with attempted murder. But as he approached, he saw Thomas Simmons's older brother, Victor, emerging from the building alongside Sheriff Daniels, both men laughing at some shared joke. Travis hung back, watching as they shook hands before Victor mounted a horse and rode out of town in the direction of the Colorado Territory. The Simmons brothers had always been tight, and if Thomas had indeed headed west to join Victor, the sheriff's friendship with the family complicated matters. Changing course, Travis instead visited the telegraph office, sending a message to a former Texas Ranger he'd once worked cattle with, who now served as a lawman in Denver. He provided a description of Thomas Simmons and the bare details of his crime, asking his friend to keep watch for the man. It was something at least. Justice might be slow, but Travis would make sure it found Thomas Simmons eventually. The ride back to the ranch seemed longer than usual, his mind filled with thoughts of the woman waiting there. He'd known her less than a day, yet already felt responsible for her in a way that went beyond basic human decency. There was something about Nora Simmons, a quiet strength beneath her fear, an intelligence in her eyes that drew him to her. As the ranch came into view, Travis felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The house stood peaceful in the afternoon sun, smoke curling from the chimney. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine coming home to this site every day, not to an empty house, but to one with Nora waiting inside. He shook off the thought. The woman was married, regardless of her husband's crimes, and she was vulnerable, dependent on Travis's help. He would not take advantage of that, would not allow himself to develop feelings that could never be returned. Nora had spent the day alternating between rest and small tasks she could manage despite her injured hands. She'd found Travis's kitchen well organized but lacking in certain comforts, so she had mixed biscuit dough and set it to bake, wanting to repay his kindness in some small way. When she heard hoofbeats approaching, she moved to the window, relief flooding through her at the sight of Travis returning. It startled her how quickly she'd come to associate him with safety, how the mere sight of him eased the constant anxiety that had been her companion for so long. She met him at the door as he carried in supplies, her eyes questioning. "Did you speak to the sheriff?" Travis set down the packages before answering. "No. But I saw something that made me think you were right to be cautious." He explained about seeing Victor Simmons with Sheriff Daniels. "Your husband's brother was heading west, likely to meet Thomas in Colorado." Nora sank into a chair, her face pale. "Then Thomas really has gone? He's not coming back?" "It seems that way," Travis knelt beside her chair, his expression serious. But that doesn't mean he shouldn't answer for what he did, Nora. I sent a telegraph to a lawman I know in Denver, asked him to keep an eye out for Thomas. Instead of relief, panic flashed across Nora's face. If they find him, if they bring him back for trial, her voice broke. No one will believe me over him. They'll say I set the fire myself, that I'm trying to ruin a good man's name. Travis took her bandaged hands in his, careful of her burns. I believe you. And I found evidence at your homestead before the fire consumed it all. The bar across the door was on the outside. No one locks themselves in a burning building. Tears welled in Nora's eyes. But it's my word against his, and a wife can't testify against her husband. That's the law. Then we'll find another way, Travis promised. The determination in his voice gave Nora a flicker of hope she hadn't dared feel in years. For now, you're safe here. That's what matters. Nora nodded, suddenly aware of how close he was, of his hands gently holding her.